Lewis Hamilton fought chaos in Austin with the calm precision only a legend possesses. While others lost control at turn 1, he turned danger into opportunity. The cameras missed it, but Hamilton pulled off the cleanest overtake of the sprint, right on his own teammate. What you didn't see was how Hamilton's sheer class salvaged Ferrari's pride when the car was collapsing underneath him. The problem wasn't the driver. It rarely is when the driver's name is Lewis Hamilton. The problem was deeper mechanical, structural, invisible to the cameras. Ferrari arrived in Austin full of optimism, speaking quietly of improvements, of a step forward in balance and consistency. But optimism has a short life in Formula One. The SF-25, fast on paper, was fragile on the track. In the punishing Texas heat, its weaknesses came alive. The car struggled to hold rear grip, the suspension couldn't handle the circuit's violent bumps, and the aerodynamic platform, the very heartbeat of the car, kept collapsing mid-corner. It wasn't a machine designed for harmony. It was a machine built on compromise. From the very first lap of qualifying, Hamilton knew it. He could feel it through the steering column, through the floor, through every vibration. The rear of the car was moving under braking a half-second delay between input and response. For a lesser driver, that would spell chaos. For Hamilton, it was data. He processed it, adjusted, and built a rhythm around the flaw. "The car's bouncing on entry," he reported calm, clinical. The team responded with minor setup tweaks, but the problem wasn't in the numbers. It was in the car's DNA. No simulation, no wind tunnel could predict how badly the SF-25 would react to the COTA surface. By the time the sprint began, Ferrari's engineers already knew they were asking for a miracle. And that's what Hamilton delivered, at least for the opening laps. He kept the tires in their window longer than Leclerc, managed the energy deployment better than Sainz had in previous runs, and somehow made a car on the edge look stable. That illusion, that serene, composed Ferrari was entirely his doing. He was balancing 1,000 invisible variables with the reflexes of a fighter pilot. Behind the wheel, the car was unpredictable. On the screen, it looked effortless. That contrast, that deception, is the mark of a genius at work. But as the sprint wore on, the problems grew teeth. The heat began to destroy the rear tires. The track temperature soared past 50 degrees Celsius, and the thin margin of balance he had engineered started to dissolve. The rear end snapped in the fast S's, the steering grew heavy, and the car began sliding in fourth gear corners, the kind of instability that eats lap time without warning. "Feels like the rears are melting," he said matter of fact. No anger, no drama, just information. He wasn't pleading for help. He was narrating the decay in real time, as if guiding his engineers through the experience. Inside the Ferrari garage, the atmosphere was tense but silent. The telemetry confirmed what he already knew. The car was overheating from within. Brake temperatures peaked, diff temperatures spiked, and the aero balance shifted forward as the floor flexed more than predicted. Every number screamed instability. But Hamilton didn't flinch. He adapted again. He widened his entries into corners, cooled the tires on straights, lifted early to regenerate battery. Each adjustment cost a tenth, but saved a lap. It was a masterclass in control, not of dominance, but of survival. There are drivers who control cars, and then there are drivers who understand them. Lewis Hamilton belongs to the second kind, the rare breed, who feels machinery not through data, but through pulse. In Austin, that gift became his survival tool. The SF-25 was more than unstable, it was unpredictable. The car reacted differently every lap, its behavior shifting with temperature, fuel load, and even the wind. Ferrari's engineers could see the chaos in the telemetry, lines of code flickering like heartbeats out of sync. But Hamilton didn't need to scream. He could feel it. From the second lap, he began to build a rhythm that no one else could replicate. He adjusted the brake bias by 0.5% per corner, modulated throttle pressure with millimeter precision, and played with the differential settings in ways that even the engineers hadn't anticipated. Every input was a calculation, every movement deliberate. His objective wasn't speed, it was control, keeping the rear tires alive, preventing the car from falling apart before the checkered flag. At 300 kilometers per hour, Hamilton wasn't racing others, he was balancing physics itself. The SF-25's most painful flaw lay underneath the rear suspension geometry. It was designed to stabilize airflow over the floor, but in practice, it did the opposite. Over Austin's bumps, the car lost ground effect, the aero platform collapsing and reattaching like a heartbeat out of rhythm. Each time that happened, the rear slid violently. Most drivers would have been passengers. Hamilton turned it into information. On the radio, his feedback was exact. Rear snaps on crest, load drops mid-apex. No emotion, just facts. His race engineer, Riccardo Adami, later admitted that Hamilton's real-time analysis was as precise as our simulation logs. But even brilliance can't bend the laws of thermodynamics. By lap 7, the tires were cooking. The track temperature was now 53 degrees, and the surface of the rear Pirellis was blistering. Hamilton did what he's done his entire career, managed it through feel. He began to take wider lines through the fast S's to reduce lateral load, lifted slightly earlier into turn 12 to cool the brakes, and used the hybrid system manually to smooth torque delivery. Every lap became an orchestra of micro-adjustments. The telemetry later showed more than 30 individual setting changes, all done while defending position. And then came the moment that defined the sprint. As Leclerc struggled with rear degradation, Hamilton caught him, waited, and pounced with surgeon-like precision. Into turn 12, he braked a fraction earlier, rotated the car on the throttle, and swept through on the inside. Clean, efficient, elegant. It wasn't an act of aggression, it was geometry in motion. That move, barely shown on the broadcast, was a lesson in control under instability. To the fans, it looked effortless. To the engineers, it was extraordinary. In those few seconds, Hamilton had done what the simulations said was impossible: overtake with a car losing aero balance mid-corner. Inside the Ferrari garage, respect replaced tension. They were watching a man doing things their model couldn't predict. The car was flawed, but Hamilton was translating chaos into data, turning survival into progress. That's why teams still fight to have him, not just for his talent, but for his intelligence. Every lap he drove that day became a reference point for Ferrari's engineers back in Maranello. They would later use his inputs to recalibrate the rear suspension and modify the floor stiffness for Mexico. In other words, what looked like a struggle on television was, in reality, development. Hamilton driving Ferrari into the future, one imperfect corner at a time. Then came the move, the one hardly anyone saw. Turn 12, downhill braking zone, one of the hardest corners in modern Formula One. Charles Leclerc had been fighting his own battle with rear grip, and for several laps, he'd been edging out of line. Hamilton read it perfectly. He set it up over 3 corners, tightening his exit from turn 9, using the dirty air through 10 to position the car just off the racing line. Then, as Leclerc hesitated into 12, Hamilton swept to the inside. No drama, no lockup, just calculation. By the apex, he was ahead. By the exit, he was gone. It was the kind of overtake that doesn't make highlight reels, but it makes history within teams. From that moment, the mood on Ferrari's pit wall changed. The red overalls that had been tense and silent began to move again. Engineers nodded. Adami's voice over the radio softened. "Great move, Lewis. Let's hold this pace." For the first time all weekend, Ferrari looked alive. Not because they were winning, but because Hamilton had given them something far rarer: confidence. The belief that even in a broken car, there was fight left. But the battle was far from over. As the sprint reached its midpoint, the Williams of Sainz, yes, Carlos Sainz, was closing fast. His car, lighter and more efficient in a straight line, was gaining 3/10 down every back straight. For Hamilton, it was a test of nerve. His tires were fading, his rear brakes were at the thermal limit, and the hybrid system was cycling on minimal recovery to avoid overheating. Any other driver would have gone defensive, panicked, made a mistake. Hamilton did what champions do: he adapted. He began using different lines into turn 1, creating tiny pockets of clean air to cool the tires, manipulating the car's aerodynamics with precision honed over 2 decades. Inside the cockpit, it wasn't silence. It was calculation. Every corner, every flick of the steering wheel, every breath was part of a rhythm, a kind of mechanical meditation. His telemetry later showed something remarkable. Between laps 10 and 15, with the car at its worst, Hamilton was still matching his early lap times within a tenth. That consistency under degradation, that mental control, is something that simply can't be taught. It's earned. It's lived. It's the muscle memory of a man who has survived rain at Suzuka, sandstorms in Bahrain, and heartbreak in Abu Dhabi. And in that stretch of laps unseen, unheard, Hamilton turned a desperate sprint into a statement. Not a statement to the media or to his critics, but to his own team. "We're not out of this," his driving seemed to say. "We can make this car work." That, more than the overtake or the finishing position, was the turning point. Ferrari didn't leave Austin with a trophy, but they left with something far more important: direction. And it came from a man who, even at 40, still leads with the same conviction he had the first day he pulled on a helmet.